This episode is brought to you by The Skeptical Buddha, The Tao of Science, my book, which is a thoughtful discourse on Eastern philosophy and how it helped birth ideas required for science and skepticism and the way it fell behind in the face of new evidence. This book discusses the long history of both philosophies as well as the tenets and variations within the varying sects, along with psychology and our own natural biases. It discusses how to counter our natural biases using science and the underlying concepts of meditation and mindfulness, a more complex understanding of how science operates than most of the public understands, and why it is the best tool we have to discover truth and reality, as well as philosophical ideas we might embrace as technology progresses. The material is packaged in a way that the average person can understand, with rich illustrations to draw the reader in and feel at peace. Welcome to After School Democracy, the podcast that attempts to fill in the gaps you almost certainly missed in school about politics, economics, and history. People often ask how we cured erectile dysfunction and invented plastic surgery, but can't cure cancer, AIDS, or the common cold. They view it as a sign of shallowness or misplaced priorities. So why do we figure out these superficial fixes before figuring out the life-threatening ones? Well, it's a mix of complexity of disease, side effects of drugs, and profit motives. Take plastic surgery. This was an amazing technique created to help people who were horribly injured to live a relatively normal life again. Once we had perfected it to be relatively safe and below a certain level of side effects, people started wanting to pay lots of money for it to modify their bodies. Because of this push and infusion of cash, new techniques are constantly being updated and perfected to help those who really need the procedure. However, curing erectile dysfunction came about for an entirely different reason. It was during a clinical trial for a health medication in elderly people that Viagra showed side effects of increased sexual health. ED is a simple problem. Blood doesn't go at the pressure it needs to go. They increase the blood flow, problem solved. It turned out not to be viable as a heart medicine, but they began making millions in the sexual health department, allowing them to fund research of harder to treat problems. Harder. And it had a knock-on effect as well. The exotic animal parts trade has been dropping. People who thought rhino horn cured ED are more likely to instead go with Viagra, and the East Asian population is becoming more and more aware of their impacts on animal extinction and slowly changing their consumption habits. Viagra was a great side effect to solving a really hard problem, similar to the side inventions created by NASA to get us to space, and has put a significant dent in poaching. That said, there is a real crime in the study of Viagra, and that is the drug was only tested in men. Later studies have shown it to be promising in treating menstrual pain in women, but since the patent was expiring, the company didn't want to spend money on such an expensive clinical trial, so it may or may not work. The reason why we can't treat cancer is because there are hundreds of types of cancer, and the common cold has about as many causes as well. It's the constantly moving target and having to first identify which kind of cancer or cold it is, and then each kind specifically that we haven't cured them. We've already cured quite a few cancers and some of the worst strains of the common cold, including ones most closely related to COVID. The flu and HIV were hard to prevent because they are RNA viruses, and each mutating as well. With HIV at the moment, lifestyle prevention and treatment have been the most successful, but they are working on vaccines to end AIDS for good. With the flu, influenza experts run simulations based on strains we haven't had in a while to give to the general public. They have decided these a year in advance, then grow them in chicken eggs for 6 months, but thanks to accelerated international travel, they have been getting it wrong more often in recent years. Either way, the more often you have a flu shot, the more protection you have from strains over time. And even if the flu shot in 1 year has only a 20% efficacy, it still cuts your risk of hospitalization or death from the flu in half, which is currently 1/4 the death rate of COVID yearly after the vaccine for COVID was developed. Penn Medicine recently announced a universal mRNA flu vaccine that will take 2 years to run through clinical trials, which, if DARPA and other groups working on it don't figure out one first, may finally help any universal COVID vaccine. However, sadly, thanks to the last election, all heavy spending by the government on COVID prevention, treatment, and vaccine development will be coming to a hard stop in 2023, and a universal vaccine will take way longer to develop than the current vaccines took. As awful as COVID was, it gave a massive amount of funding, clinical trials, and research for the mRNA vaccine industry, and now most of the traditional vaccines are being replaced by better, cheaper mRNA vaccines, and there has been a dramatic ramp-up of cancer vaccines, including a melanoma vaccine that is going to undergo clinical trials over the next 2 years, and many firms are announcing the probability of having vaccines for many different cancers, including pancreatic cancer, by 2030. So why did we treat ED before cancer? Are we shallow? Not really. It's a mix of the fact that one is way harder to treat than the other, capitalism, and a happy side effect of trying to treat something else that was complicated. It's the fact that we aren't hyper-funding science without a global pandemic that shuts down society that makes us shallow. Not that we figured out boner pills before fixing all of cancer. So as always, thank you all for watching this as a video or listening to this as a podcast, which I'm sure was completely uncontroversial to anyone, especially to the YouTube monetization team. So if you found this useful, please donate to my Patreon. Just a reminder that I'm Anubis2814 on YouTube, and I have almost 700 videos on my channel that I've made over the past 11 years on religion, science, psychology, and politics. Please go check them out, and if your site has the option, like, rate, review, and comment. A special thanks goes out to Kendall Copperberg, Mylon Mia, Ogrel, Elias Garcia Guevara, and Joe Taylor for their $10 or more Wapawet level donations. I'm always humbled by the fact that they find my work worth funding and worth driving me forward. Thank you all. Please consider donating to my work if you can, and thank you all for listening.